I'm Emily, 32 years old. The night my husband punched me in front of 150 guests at his law firm's Christmas party, I thought the worst had finally happened. But 2 hours later, hiding in a hotel parking lot with blood on my dress, I called my brother, an FBI agent, and said, "I think my husband's been stealing millions," and using my name to do it. What followed exposed one of the biggest legal frauds in Boston's history. Before I tell you what happened next, let me know where you're watching from. And truly, thank you for being here. 8 years ago, I genuinely believed I'd hit the jackpot. I was 24, fresh out of nursing school at Boston University, pulling double shifts at Mass General and living in a studio apartment in Allston that was basically a glorified closet with a hot plate. Then I met Michael Harrison at a hospital fundraiser, and suddenly my entire world shifted. Michael was 32, devastatingly handsome in that classic New England way, and he carried himself like someone who'd never heard the word no in his entire life. He was a partner at Harrison & Associates, his family's law firm that had been serving Boston's elite since 1923. Third-generation Harvard law. Old money so old it had cobwebs on it. The kind of family that had hospital wings named after them and reserved seating at Symphony Hall. When he asked for my number that night, I actually laughed. Guys like Michael Harrison didn't date girls like me, small-town Ohio transplants who bought their dresses at Target and had student loans that would outlive cockroaches. But he was persistent, charming, and when he smiled at me across that ballroom, I felt like the only woman in the room. Our first date was dinner at Mistral, where I spent the entire evening terrified I'd use the wrong fork. He ordered wine that cost more than my monthly grocery budget and talked about skiing in Aspen like it was as normal as going to CVS. I should have known then that we were from different planets, but I was 24 and stupid, and he made me feel special. The courtship was like something out of a movie. Flowers delivered to the hospital where I worked, weekend trips to his family's house on Martha's Vineyard, charity galas where he'd introduce me to judges and politicians like I belonged in their world. I remember thinking I was living in a fairy tale. Looking back now, I realized Michael wasn't courting me. He was auditioning me. He needed someone respectable, someone caring, someone who wouldn't ask too many questions about his work or his family's business. A nurse was perfect. We're trained to be caregivers, to put other people's needs first, to work long hours without complaining. I was exactly what he was looking for, and I was too infatuated to see it. We got engaged after 6 months. I thought it was romantic, this whirlwind courtship. Now I know he was in a hurry because his father William was starting to show signs of early onset dementia, and Michael needed a wife who could help care for him without getting suspicious about certain irregularities in the firm's finances. The wedding was at the Four Seasons, 300 guests, an orchestra, and a dress that cost more than my car. My parents flew in from Dayton looking overwhelmed and out of place among all that Boston Brahmin splendor. My mother kept whispering to me, "Are you sure about this, honey? They seem different from us." I told her she was being paranoid. I was marrying into one of Boston's most respected families. Michael's father, William, was a pillar of the legal community. His mother, Eleanor, organized charity events for causes I'd never even heard of. His younger sister, Jennifer, was following in the family tradition, working her way through Suffolk Law School while clerking at the DA's office. They welcomed me with open arms, or at least I thought they did. Eleanor took me shopping on Newbury Street, teaching me which designers were appropriate and which jewelry went with what occasions. William would tell me stories about the firm's history, how his grandfather had built their reputation by representing immigrants who couldn't afford proper legal counsel. I gave up everything to fit into their world. I quit my job at Mass General because Eleanor said it wasn't suitable for someone in my position to work such demanding hours. I closed my own bank account and added my name to Michael's, because he said it was more efficient for married couples to share finances. I even let him talk me out of keeping in touch with my college friends, because they wouldn't understand our lifestyle. For the first few years, I thought I was living the dream. We had a gorgeous Victorian house in Beacon Hill that Michael's grandfather had bought in the 1940s, complete with original hardwood floors and a garden that was featured in Better Homes and Gardens. I threw dinner parties for Michael's colleagues, organized charity fundraisers with Eleanor, and slowly transformed from Emily Walker from Dayton, Ohio, into Mrs. Michael Harrison of Boston, Massachusetts. But the real test of my usefulness came when William's condition started deteriorating. Alzheimer's runs in families, and William's case was aggressive and early. By the time he was 68, he was having episodes where he didn't recognize his own son. That's when I really became valuable to the Harrison family. As a trained nurse, I was the obvious choice to manage William's care. I researched the best doctors, found the right medications, learned everything I could about managing dementia symptoms. I spent hours with William during his lucid moments, listening to his stories about the old days, helping him remember faces in family photos, making sure he took his pills and ate his meals. I genuinely loved William. He was kind, generous, and even as his memory faded, he never lost his sense of humor or his affection for people. During his good days, he'd tell me I was the daughter he'd never had, that I was too good for his son, that I should have been a lawyer instead of wasting my talents on nursing. What I didn't realize was that while I was caring for William, Michael was systematically stealing from him. The first sign that something was wrong came about 18 months ago. I was trying to pay for William's prescription medications, expensive drugs that insurance only partially covered, and my credit card was declined. When I called the bank, they told me the account was frozen due to irregular activity. When I asked Michael about it, he got defensive. "It's just a paperwork issue with the firm's accounting," he said, not looking up from his laptop. "We're restructuring some assets. I'll handle it." But it kept happening. Cards getting declined, bills arriving in my name for services I'd never used, credit reports showing accounts I'd never opened. When I tried to access our joint savings account online, I discovered I'd been locked out of the system entirely. That's when I started paying attention to things I'd been ignoring for years. Michael's late nights at the office that stretched until 2 or 3 a.m. Business trips that seemed to involve more golf courses than courtrooms. Phone conversations that stopped abruptly when I walked into the room. I started noticing the way David Walsh, Michael's business partner, would look at me during firm social events, like he knew something I didn't. The way Eleanor would change the subject whenever I asked about the family's finances or William's medical bills. The way Jennifer avoided spending time alone with me, even though we'd always been close. 6 months ago, everything changed. Michael became a different person almost overnight. The charming, attentive husband I'd married was replaced by someone cold, controlling, and angry. He'd disappear for days without explanation, then come home in a rage about things that made no sense. "You're spending too much money," he'd accuse me, even though I hadn't bought anything for myself in months. "You're asking too many questions about the firm," he'd say, when I wondered why our financial situation seemed so precarious, despite his supposed success. "You're making me look bad in front of important people," he'd snap, when I tried to make conversation at parties or charity events. The first time he grabbed my arm hard enough to leave bruises, I was so shocked I didn't know how to react. We'd been arguing about William's care. I wanted to hire a professional aide to help during the day, but Michael said we couldn't afford it. When I suggested using some of the money from William's own accounts to pay for his care, Michael lost it. "You don't understand how money works," he said, his fingers digging into my upper arm. "You don't understand business, you don't understand our family, and you sure as hell don't understand your place in this house." I pulled away, staring at the red marks on my arm. "Don't ever touch me like that again." He didn't apologize. He just looked at me with this cold expression and said, "Then don't give me a reason to." That's when I knew I was in trouble, but I still thought it was about our marriage, about Michael's stress from work, about the pressure of caring for his sick father. I had no idea I was living with a family of criminals who had been using me as cover for their crimes for 8 years. The breaking point came 2 weeks before the Christmas party. I was going through William's medical files, trying to organize his insurance paperwork, when I found something that didn't make sense. There were bills for treatments he'd never received, payments to medical facilities he'd never visited, insurance claims for procedures that had never been performed. When I brought this to Michael's attention, he exploded in a way I'd never seen before. Not just angry, violent. He swept the papers off the Kitwalker table, screaming that I was too stupid to understand medical billing, that I was paranoid and ungrateful, that I should focus on taking care of William instead of playing detective. That's when he hit me for the first time. Not a slap, a closed fist punch to my stomach that knocked the wind out of me and left me gasping on the Kitwalker floor. "Look what you made me do," he said, standing over me. "Look what happens when you don't mind your own business." I should have left that night. I should have called the police, packed my bags, and never looked back. But I was so confused, so hurt, so convinced that this was somehow my fault that I stayed. I told myself it was a one-time thing, that Michael was stressed, that things would go back to normal once I stopped making trouble. Instead, I moved into the guest bedroom and tried to make myself invisible. I stopped asking questions about the bills, stopped trying to access our accounts, stopped doing anything that might set him off. I focused entirely on caring for William, because that seemed to be the only thing I could do right. But Michael's behavior kept escalating. He'd come home drunk and looking for a fight. He'd accuse me of having affairs with William's doctors, with the mailman, with anyone who showed me basic human kindness. He'd go through my phone, my email, my personal belongings, looking for evidence of imaginary betrayals. The worst part was that everyone around us acted like this was normal. Eleanor would make jokes about newlywed adjustments when she saw the bruises on my arms. David Walsh would change the subject whenever I tried to talk to him about Michael's behavior. Jennifer, who I'd once considered a sister, started avoiding me entirely. I felt like I was going crazy, like I was living in some alternate reality where everyone could see what was happening to me, but pretended it wasn't real. That's why when Michael called 2 weeks after our worst fight and invited me to the firm's Christmas party, I actually said yes. He sounded like the old Michael, apologetic, charming, promising that things would be different. "I know I've been under a lot of stress," he said. "The firm is going through some big changes, and I've been taking it out on you. That's not fair. Come to the party, Emily. Let's show everyone that we're still solid." I wanted to believe him so badly. I wanted to believe that the man I'd fallen in love with was still in there somewhere, that we could fix whatever had gone wrong between us. So I bought a new dress, red silk, the kind of thing Eleanor would approve of, and spent 2 hours getting ready. I wanted to look like the Emily that Michael had fallen in love with, the woman who deserved to be standing beside him at his family's most important social event of the year. I had no idea I was walking into a trap. The Christmas party was being held at the Fairmont Copley Plaza, in the same ballroom where Michael and I had our wedding reception 8 years earlier. The irony wasn't lost on me as I walked through those familiar doors, remembering how hopeful and naive I'd been on our wedding day. The room was exactly as elegant as I remembered: crystal chandeliers, marble floors, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Everyone was there: federal judges, state representatives, the mayor's chief of staff, and pretty much every prominent attorney in Massachusetts. This wasn't just Harrison and Associates' Christmas party. It was the legal community's social event of the year. I spotted Michael immediately. He was at the bar near the far end of the room, looking devastatingly handsome in his custom tuxedo, surrounded by the usual crowd of admirers and ass-kissers. For a moment, seeing him like that, I remembered why I'd fallen in love with him in the first place. Then I saw the woman standing next to him. She was blonde, probably in her late 20s, wearing a black cocktail dress that probably cost more than most people's rent. But it wasn't her looks that made my stomach drop. It was the way Michael was looking at her, the way his hand rested casually on her lower back, the way he leaned in to whisper something in her ear that made her laugh like they shared intimate secrets. I stood there for a full minute, just watching them, trying to process what I was seeing. This wasn't just Michael talking to a colleague or a client. This was Michael with someone he was clearly involved with, and they weren't making any effort to hide it. I thought about turning around and leaving. I should have turned around and left. Instead, I walked across that ballroom with my head held high, channeling every ounce of dignity I had left. "Michael," I said when I reached them, my voice surprisingly steady. He turned, and for just a split second, I saw something like guilt flash across his face. Then his expression went cold, the same look he'd been giving me for months. "Emily," he said, like my name left a bad taste in his mouth. "This is Amanda Richards, our new junior partner. Amanda, this is Emily. Not my wife, not Emily Harrison. Just Emily, like I was some acquaintance he'd rather not acknowledge." Amanda looked me up and down with the kind of calculated assessment women do when they're sizing up competition. "Oh," she said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "You're the nurse. How quaint. The dismissal in her tone was so blatant that several nearby guests actually stopped their conversations to stare. I felt heat rising in my cheeks, but I kept my voice level. Actually, I used to be a nurse, I said. Now I manage care for Michael's father. William has Alzheimer's, so it's full-time work. How noble of you, Amanda replied, but her eyes were already drifting away, like she'd lost interest in the conversation. That's when I realized this wasn't just about an affair. The way Michael was looking at Amanda, the way she was acting like she belonged in his world, while I was just an inconvenient reminder of his past. They weren't just sleeping together. They were planning a future together. I need to use the restroom, I said, excusing myself before I did something I'd regret. In the bathroom, I stared at myself in the mirror, trying to hold it together. I looked good. The red dress was flattering. My makeup was perfect. My hair was styled the way Eleanor had taught me. I looked like I belonged in this world, so why did I feel like everyone could see right through me? I took a few deep breaths, reapplied my lipstick, and walked back out into the party. I was not going to let Michael and his girlfriend humiliate me. I was going to hold my head high, make polite conversation, and leave with whatever dignity I had left. That's when I overheard the conversation that changed everything. I was walking past a small seating area near the corner bar when I heard Michael's voice. He was talking to David Walsh, and they were standing just out of sight behind a marble pillar. "Are the papers ready?" Michael was asking. "Everything's in place," David replied. "The divorce attorney has the documentation prepared. Once we get her signature on the refinancing documents, the house transfers entirely into your name. All of William's medical debts get assigned to her as the primary caregiver. She'll be financially responsible for his care, while you're free to marry Amanda without any messy property disputes." My blood turned to ice water. "And she doesn't suspect anything?" Michael asked. "Why would she? As far as Emily knows, she's signing routine paperwork to help with William's medical expenses. She has no idea that everything, the house, the accounts, even her own credit, is about to become her problem while you walk away clean." "Perfect," Michael said. "Amanda's divorce from her husband in California should be finalized by spring. We can have a summer wedding, maybe in Martha's Vineyard. Start fresh." I pressed myself against the wall, trying to process what I was hearing. Michael wasn't just having an affair. He was planning to frame me for financial fraud, while he ran off with his married girlfriend. "What about the other situation?" David asked, lowering his voice. "You mean the client accounts? Emily's name is on everything we need it to be on. If anyone investigates, all trails lead back to her. She's been managing William's finances for years. It'll look like she's been skimming from his accounts to cover her own expenses." "Brilliant," David said. "Use her nursing background and access to William against her. She'll look like the classic caregiver who takes advantage of vulnerable elderly clients." That's when I understood the full scope of what they'd done to me. For years, while I'd been caring for William, loving him like the father I'd never had, they'd been using my access to him to steal his money. And now they were going to pin their crimes on me. I should have walked away then. I should have left the party, gone straight to a lawyer, and started building a case. But I was so angry, so betrayed, so absolutely furious that 8 years of my life had been built on lies, that I lost my mind completely. I walked around that pillar and stood right in front of them. "Interesting conversation you're having about my house and my credit," I said, loud enough that people at nearby tables turned to look. David's face went white, but Michael just smiled. That cold, calculating smile that I now realized had been hiding behind his charm for our entire marriage. "Emily," he said calmly, like he was talking to a child having a tantrum, "you're making a scene." "Am I?" I said, my voice rising. "Because from where I'm standing, it sounds like you're planning to commit fraud. Multiple felonies, actually." Michael's mask slipped for just a moment, and I saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before. Pure hatred. "You have no idea what you're talking about," he said, grabbing my arm so hard I knew it would leave marks. "You're embarrassing yourself." People were definitely staring now. I could see Eleanor across the room, making her way toward us with a look of alarm on her face. Jennifer was behind her, her face pale. "Let go of me," I said, trying to pull away. Michael's grip tightened. "Or what? You'll leave? Go where? With what money?" "You have nothing, Emily. You are nothing without this family." I looked around the room, hoping someone would intervene, but everyone was just watching like this was dinner theater. That's when I saw Amanda standing near the bar with her phone out, recording everything. Something inside me snapped completely. "At least I'm not a fraud," I said, loud enough for half the ballroom to hear. At least I didn't steal from my own father to pay for my girlfriend's divorce lawyer. I don't know where those words came from. I was just so angry I was throwing out anything that might hurt him. But the way Michael's face changed, the way David stepped back like I'd physically struck him, told me I'd hit something. That's when Michael's hand came across my face so hard I literally saw stars. The crack of his palm against my cheek echoed through the ballroom like a gunshot. Conversation stopped. The string quartet faltered mid-song. For a moment, the only sound was the ringing in my ears. Then Michael grabbed a fistful of my hair, my carefully styled, Eleanor-approved hair, and started dragging me toward the nearest exit. I stumbled, trying to keep up, my scalp screaming with pain. I could hear gasps from the crowd, the sound of chairs scraping as people stood to get a better view. Through the chaos, I heard Eleanor's voice. "Well, she finally showed her true colors, didn't she?" Michael dragged me past tables full of Boston's most prominent citizens. Judges who'd been to our house for dinner, politicians who'd taken campaign contributions from Harrison and Associates, attorneys who'd partnered with the firm on major cases. Not one of them moved to help me. They just stood there with their drinks and their canapes, watching like I was part of the evening's entertainment. He pulled me through a side exit that led to an alley behind the hotel. The December air hit me like a slap, and I realized I was crying, not from sadness, but from pure rage. Michael threw me against the brick wall so hard I thought I'd broken something. When I looked up at him, he was straightening his bow tie, like nothing had happened. "If you ever try to embarrass me like that again," he said, his voice deadly calm, "it'll be much worse than a slap. Do you understand me?" I nodded, too shocked to speak. Blood was trickling from my split lip, and I could feel clumps of my hair scattered around my feet. "Good," he said. Then he walked back into the hotel, leaving me bleeding in an alley in December in Boston. For maybe 10 minutes, I just sat there on the cold ground, trying to process what had just happened. My dress was torn, my hair was ruined, and I could taste blood in my mouth. But as the shock wore off, something else took its place. Not sadness, not fear, pure, clarifying rage. I pulled out my phone and started taking pictures. My face, my torn dress, the hair on the ground. Then I took a video, right there in that alley, documenting everything while it was fresh, and my voice was still steady. But the call I made next, that's what changed everything. Because there was something Michael didn't know about me, something I'd never told him in all our years of marriage, because he'd never bothered to ask about my family beyond their obvious lack of social status. My older brother Jake wasn't just insecurity, like I always said when people asked what he did for work. Jake was a senior forensic accountant for the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. I called Jake at 11:47 p.m. from that hotel parking lot, sitting in my car with blood on my dress and my life in ruins around me. He answered on the second ring. He always did when I called, no matter what time it was. "Emily, what's wrong?" Just hearing his voice, that familiar Ohio accent that I'd worked so hard to lose, made me start crying again. But this time it wasn't from sadness or fear. It was from relief. "Jake," I said, my voice surprisingly steady despite the tears. "I need you to investigate my husband. I think he's been stealing from his clients, and I think he's been using my identity to do it." There was a long pause. Jake had never liked Michael. He'd told me from the beginning that something felt off about the Harrison family, that they had too much money and too little oversight for a small regional law firm. I'd always defended Michael, told Jake he was just being overprotective. "Are you safe right now?" he asked. "I am now." "Good. Don't go home. Don't contact him." "And Emily?" "Yeah?" "Document everything. Every bruise, every torn piece of clothing, every witness who saw what happened tonight. Take pictures of everything. We're going to bury him." That's when I smiled for the first time in months, because Jake wasn't just my overprotective big brother from Dayton, Ohio. He was a federal agent with 15 years of experience investigating financial crimes, and I just handed him a case that was about to make his career. I spent that night at a hotel near Logan Airport, taking pictures of my injuries and writing down everything I could remember about the last 8 years. every suspicious financial transaction, every time Michael had asked me to sign documents without reading them, every conversation I'd overheard between him and David about client management. Jake drove up from the FBI field office in New Haven the next morning. I hadn't seen him in 2 years. Michael had always found excuses for why we couldn't visit family, why holidays with the Harrisons were more important than maintaining relationships with my simple relatives from Ohio. When Jake walked into that hotel room and saw my face, his expression went darker than I'd ever seen it. "Jesus Christ, Emily," he said, pulling out his phone to take official photos. "How long has this been going on?" "The hitting? 6 months. But Jake, that's not even the worst part." I told him everything. About the bills in my name that I'd never seen. About the client accounts I'd been asked to help manage. About William's medical expenses that never seemed to match his actual treatments. About the conversation I'd overheard between Michael and David. About their plan to frame me for their crimes, while Michael ran off with his married girlfriend. Jake listened without interrupting, taking notes in that methodical way he'd learned at Quantico. When I finished, he looked up from his notepad. "Emily, what you're describing isn't just domestic violence. This is a RICO case. Conspiracy, wire fraud, elder abuse, identity theft. We're talking about federal crimes that carry decades in prison. Can you investigate them?" "Investigate them?" Jake laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I'm going to destroy them, but I need you to understand something. Once we start this, there's no going back. Your marriage is over, obviously, but this is going to get ugly. They're going to try to paint you as a gold-digging nurse who manipulated a vulnerable old man. They're going to drag your name through the mud." I thought about that for maybe 3 seconds. "Do it," I said. "Destroy them all." Within 48 hours, Jake had assembled a task force of FBI agents, IRS investigators, and attorneys from the U.S. Attorney's Office. They didn't just look into Michael's recent activities, they went back 6 years, following every financial transaction, every client account, every suspicious transfer that had passed through Harrison and Associates. What they found was so much worse than I'd imagined. Michael and David hadn't just been stealing from a few client accounts. They'd been running a sophisticated financial fraud operation that specifically targeted elderly clients with dementia and Alzheimer's. They'd identify vulnerable clients through Eleanor's charity work and country club connections, then slowly drain their accounts through fake legal fees, fraudulent medical expenses, and shell companies that existed only on paper. And they'd been using my name, my social security number, and my nursing credentials to legitimize their crimes. Remember all those documents Michael had asked me to sign over the years? Just routine paperwork, he'd said. Trust management for clients. What I'd actually been signing were incorporation papers for shell companies, bank account authorizations, and insurance fraud documents. Every single crime they'd committed had my signature on it somewhere. If Jake hadn't investigated, if I'd just quietly divorced Michael like he expected me to do, I would have been the one facing federal charges while he lived happily ever after with Amanda and millions of stolen dollars. But the FBI didn't just find evidence of financial fraud. They found something else that made my blood run cold. Videos, dozens of them, hidden on Michael's laptop and backed up to a cloud server I didn't know existed. Videos of him hitting me during arguments. Videos of him shoving me, grabbing me, threatening me. He'd been secretly recording our fights for months, collecting evidence to use against me if I ever tried to leave or expose his crimes. The plan was to paint me as an unstable, abusive wife who'd attacked him when he discovered my criminal activities. He was going to claim that I was the mastermind behind the elder abuse scheme, that I'd used my nursing background and access to vulnerable clients to steal their money, and that he was the innocent husband who'd tried to stop me. The Christmas party assault wasn't a moment of anger, it was orchestrated. He'd wanted witnesses to see me attack him first, to see him defend himself. Amanda had been recording the whole thing on her phone, ready to edit it to make me look like the aggressor. But Michael had made one crucial mistake. When you punch your wife in the face in front of 150 people, and half of those people are federal judges and politicians, and your wife happens to have a brother in law enforcement, you've just created the kind of scandal that brings down entire institutions. The FBI didn't just investigate Harrison and Associates. They raided the firm. At 6 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks after the Christmas party, Federal agents with search warrants kicked down the doors of one of Boston's most prestigious law firms. They seized every computer, every file cabinet, every piece of financial documentation going back 10 years. Michael was arrested at his gym, in front of half the partners from Boston's major law firms. The photo of him being perp-walked in his tennis whites made the front page of the Boston Globe. David Walsh was arrested at his daughter's school Christmas concert. Eleanor was arrested at her weekly bridge game at the country club. Jennifer was arrested at the courthouse where she worked as a prosecutor. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Within hours, the story was everywhere. Prominent Boston law firm raided an elder abuse investigation. Harvard-educated attorneys accused of stealing millions from dementia clients. Nurses' domestic violence report exposes massive financial fraud. But the FBI didn't stop there. They froze every account, every asset, every piece of property connected to the Harrison family. The house I'd lived in for 8 years, the one Michael had planned to steal from me, seized as proceeds of criminal activity. The Martha's Vineyard house where I'd spent so many weekends trying to fit into their world, seized. The art collection Eleanor was so proud of, seized. Michael's collection of vintage cars, seized and sold at auction. And then the victims started coming forward, dozens of them, elderly people who'd trusted Harrison and Associates with their life savings, only to discover their accounts had been systematically drained. Families who'd lost their inheritance to fake legal fees and fraudulent medical expenses. There was Mrs. Patterson, 78 years old, who'd lost $400,000 from her late husband's pension fund, money that was supposed to pay for her own care as she aged. Mr. and Mrs. Rodriguez, both in their 80s, who'd had their entire estate stolen while they were caring for their grandson with special needs. The Kowalskis, whose family trust had been emptied to pay for legal services that had never been performed. And William Harrison himself, Michael's own father, who'd been robbed of nearly $800,000 by his own son, while I was lovingly caring for him, helping him remember how to tie his shoes and feeding him when he forgot how to use a fork. The total amount stolen over 6 years? More than $12 million from 63 victims, most of them over the age of 70. As the evidence mounted, Michael tried desperately to make a deal. He offered to testify against David and Eleanor, claiming they'd forced him into the scheme, that he was just following orders from his business partner and his domineering mother. But the FBI had recordings, phone calls where Michael bragged about the easy money they were making off senile old people, text messages where he joked about clients who were too far gone to notice their money disappearing, emails where he discussed expanding their operation to other cities. There was no plea deal generous enough to get him out of federal prison. In the end, Michael Harrison, Harvard Law graduate, third-generation attorney, pillar of Boston society, pled guilty to 47 counts of wire fraud, money laundering, conspiracy, and elder abuse. He was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison without possibility of parole. David Walsh got 18 years. Eleanor got 8 years and permanent disbarment. Jennifer, because she'd cooperated with investigators and had played a smaller role, got 3 years and lost her law license permanently. Harrison and Associates, the law firm that had been serving Boston's elite since 1923, was shut down permanently by the Massachusetts Bar Association. But you know what felt like real justice? The civil lawsuits. The victims and their families didn't just sue for the money that had been stolen. They sued for punitive damages, emotional distress, elder abuse penalties, and pain and suffering. Under Massachusetts law, elder abuse cases carry triple damages, which meant the Harrison family wasn't just responsible for the $12 million they'd stolen. They were on the hook for $36 million in total damages. The house where I'd tried so hard to be the perfect wife, sold to pay restitution to victims. The Martha's Vineyard property where Eleanor had hosted charity events to identify new targets, sold. The art, the cars, the jewelry, the country club memberships, all of it liquidated to compensate the people they'd victimized. By the time the civil cases were settled, the Harrison family had lost everything they'd accumulated over 3 generations. Not just the money they'd stolen, but their entire legitimate fortune as well. And Amanda, Michael's married girlfriend who was supposed to be his ticket to a fresh start. She disappeared to California the day the federal indictments were unsealed. Turns out she'd been married the entire time to a gambling addict who owed money to some very dangerous people. She'd been using Michael to pay off her husband's debts, while stringing him along with promises of divorce and remarriage. Michael found out about Amanda's deception while he was sitting in federal lockup awaiting trial. According to Jennifer, who visited him once before cutting off all contact, he spent 3 days in solitary confinement after attacking his cellmate in a rage when he learned the truth. The woman he'd destroyed his marriage for, the woman he'd planned to frame me for federal crimes to be with, had been playing him the entire time. There's a certain poetic justice in that, don't you think? You might think this story ends with me feeling vindicated, watching my abusers get their comeuppance from the safety of my new life. But honestly, the day Michael was sentenced, sitting in that federal courthouse, listening to the judge read off 15 years in prison, I felt empty, not happy, not satisfied, just hollow. I'd spent 8 years of my life with these people. Yes, they were criminals who'd used and abused me, but I'd also genuinely loved William during his illness. I'd celebrated Christmases with them, shared family dinners, built what I thought were real relationships. I'd held Eleanor's hand when she was worried about William's diagnosis. I'd helped Jennifer study for the bar exam, celebrated when she passed, been proud of her achievements, learning that it had all been performance, all manipulation designed to keep me compliant while they committed crimes in my name. It messed with my head for months. I spent the first few weeks after Michael's arrest feeling like I was living in some alternate reality. The woman I'd been for 8 years, Mrs. Michael Harrison, pillar of Boston society, devoted wife and caregiver, had been completely fabricated, but I didn't know who Emily Walker was anymore either. I'd given up so much of myself to fit into Michael's world that I'd forgotten who I was before him. That's when Jake insisted I get professional help. Real help. Not just the family therapy Michael had insisted we try when our marriage started falling apart. He found me a therapist who specialized in domestic violence and financial abuse, Dr. Rebecca Martinez, who helped me understand that what I'd experienced wasn't just a bad marriage, it was systematic psychological manipulation designed to make me compliant and controllable. Financial abuse is one of the most effective tools abusers use, Dr. Martinez explained during one of our early sessions. They don't just steal your money. They steal your ability to survive independently. They make you financially dependent so you can't leave. Then they use that dependency to justify their control over every aspect of your life. She helped me understand that Michael hadn't chosen me randomly. He'd specifically targeted someone like me, young, naive, from a different social class, with valuable professional skills and a natural tendency to put other people's needs first. I wasn't a victim because I was weak or stupid. I was a victim because I had exactly the qualities Michael needed to execute his crimes. It took me 6 months of twice-weekly therapy sessions to stop blaming myself for not seeing the signs sooner. Another 6 months to stop feeling guilty about the fact that my actions had sent 4 people to prison, even though those people had been systematically stealing from vulnerable elderly victims. But slowly, with Dr. Martinez's help, I started rebuilding my sense of self. The first thing I did was take back my name. I'd been Emily Harrison for 8 years, but that woman had been a fiction created to serve Michael's needs. I went back to being Emily Walker, and for the first time since college, I felt like myself again. The second thing I did was go back to work. Real work, not the performative charity organizing and social climbing I'd been doing as Michael's wife. I got a job in the oncology ward at Mass General, helping cancer patients and their families navigate the hardest time of their lives. It felt incredible to be useful again, to use my nursing skills for something real and meaningful instead of unknowingly providing cover for financial crimes. My patients didn't care about my social status or my husband's career or whether I was wearing the right jewelry to the right charity gala. They just needed someone who was competent, compassionate, and present. Working with cancer patients also gave me perspective on my own situation. These were people facing genuine life-or-death struggles, and they were doing it with more grace and courage than I'd shown during my relatively privileged problems. It reminded me that surviving abuse isn't the same as overcoming it. You have to actively choose to rebuild your life, not just escape your old one. The third thing I did was start dating again. I know that sounds trivial compared to everything else, but it was actually terrifying. After 8 years with someone who'd systematically undermined my self-worth, I wasn't sure I knew how to have a healthy relationship with anyone. My first few attempts were disasters. I was either too suspicious of normal kindness or too grateful for basic respect. I'd panic when men paid for dinner because Michael had used financial control to manipulate me. I'd get anxious when they didn't immediately respond to texts because Michael had trained me to expect punishment for the smallest infractions. But Dr. Martinez helped me understand that healing isn't linear, and learning to trust again after abuse takes time and practice. The man I'm with now, Tom, is nothing like Michael. He's a high school history teacher who makes $52,000 a year, drives a 10-year-old Honda Civic, and lives in a one-bedroom apartment in Somerville that he's decorated entirely with furniture from IKEA and posters of historical battlefields. When I first met him at a coffee shop near the hospital, I almost didn't give him my number because he seemed too normal. After 8 years with someone who used charm and wealth as weapons, Tom's straightforward kindness felt suspicious. But Tom has never once raised his voice to me. He's never grabbed my arm or called me stupid or made me feel small. He asks about my day and actually listens to the answers. He holds doors and brings me soup when I'm sick, and thinks my job is important and interesting instead of something to be tolerated. After 8 years with someone who hit me and called it discipline, being with someone who apologizes when he accidentally bumps into me in the kit, Walker feels revolutionary. We've been together for 8 months now, and I'm still learning what healthy love looks like. Tom doesn't need to control me to feel secure. He doesn't see my independence as a threat to his masculinity. He actually encourages me to spend time with my friends, to pursue my own interests, to be my own person instead of just an extension of his identity. Last month, he met Jake for the first time when my brother came up to Boston for a weekend visit. I was nervous. Jake is naturally protective, especially after everything I've been through, and he tends to interrogate any man who shows interest in me. But after spending an afternoon with Tom, Jake pulled me aside and said, "I like him, Emily. He looks at you the way you deserve to be looked at." That's when I realized how far I'd come. For the first time since my marriage imploded, I wasn't defining myself by what had been done to me. I was building a life based on what I wanted, not what someone else expected from me. Michael writes me letters from prison sometimes. They arrive every few months, forwarded through the Federal Victim Services Program that handles communication between federal inmates and their victims. I don't read them, but I don't immediately throw them away either. They sit on my Kit Walker counter for a few days. These white envelopes with Federal Correctional Institution defense stamped in the corner, before I eventually put them through the shredder. Jake read one of them once, just to make sure Michael wasn't making threats or trying to manipulate me into some kind of contact. He said it was typical abuser bullshit. Apologies mixed with justifications. Promises that he's changed mixed with subtle implications that I was partially responsible for our problems. He's trying to rewrite history, Jake told me. Make himself the victim of circumstances instead of the architect of his own destruction. Don't give him the satisfaction of a response. I don't plan to. Some stories don't end with forgiveness, and that's okay. Some people don't deserve second chances, and recognizing that isn't cruel, it's survival. The other day, I was working with a patient whose husband had been stealing from her accounts to pay for his gambling addiction. She kept making excuses for him, insisting that he was a good man who'd just made some bad choices, that their 30-year marriage meant something, and she couldn't just throw it away. I found myself telling her something Dr. Martinez had told me. The length of time you've been with someone who hurts you doesn't determine how much longer you should stay. The fact that someone was good to you once doesn't obligate you to accept their abuse forever. She looked at me with this expression of recognition, like I'd given her permission to stop making excuses for someone who'd betrayed her trust in the most fundamental way. That's when I realized that surviving Michael's abuse and the Harrison family's crimes had given me something valuable. The ability to recognize similar patterns in other people's lives, and maybe, sometimes, help them see what I couldn't see for so long. I've started volunteering with a domestic violence organization here in Boston, helping other women navigate the legal and financial complexities of leaving abusive relationships. It's not easy work. Some of the stories I hear make my own experience look straightforward by comparison, but it feels meaningful in a way that organizing charity galas for Eleanor never did. Last week, I helped a woman whose husband had been forging her signature on loan documents, creating debt in her name that she'd never agreed to take on. The parallels to my own situation were so clear that I could walk her through exactly what evidence she needed to collect, which agencies to contact, how to protect her credit while building a case against him. She thanked me afterward, saying that talking to someone who'd been through something similar made her feel less crazy, less alone. That's when I understood why I'd survived everything Michael put me through. Not just to rebuild my own life, but to help other people rebuild theirs. Next month marks 2 years since that Christmas party at the Fairmont Copley Plaza. 2 years since Michael dragged me through that ballroom by my hair, while 150 people watched and did nothing. I drive past that hotel sometimes on my way to work, and I remember the woman I was that night, desperate to save a marriage that had been built on lies, willing to accept crumbs of affection from someone who saw me as a useful tool, rather than a human being. That woman feels like a stranger to me now. Not because I'm ashamed of her, but because I understand now that she was doing the best she could with the information she had. She couldn't have known that the man she loved was systematically destroying her life, while using her to commit federal crimes. She couldn't have known that his entire family was complicit in a scheme that victimized dozens of vulnerable people. All she knew was that she loved someone who claimed to love her back, and she was willing to fight for that relationship even when it was killing her. I don't regret trying to save my marriage. I regret that it took me 8 years to realize it was never real in the first place. But I'm grateful, genuinely grateful, for that phone call I made to Jake from a hotel parking lot, with blood on my dress. I'm grateful that I had someone who believed me, someone with the skills and resources to uncover the truth. I'm grateful that the FBI took my case seriously and pursued justice not just for me, but for all of Michael's victims. Most of all, I'm grateful that I found out who I really am when everything I thought I knew about my life was stripped away. I'm not Mrs. Michael Harrison anymore, the woman who organized charity events and smiled at dinner parties and made excuses for bruises on her arms. I'm Emily Walker, a nurse who helps cancer patients fight for their lives, a survivor who helps other women escape abuse, a daughter who has regular Sunday dinners with her family in Ohio, a girlfriend who's learning what healthy love looks like. I'm someone who refuses to be silent when I see injustice, someone who asks questions when things don't add up, someone who fights back when people try to make me small. Michael used to tell me I was nothing without him, that I'd never survive on my own, that no one would ever want me if they knew the truth about who I really was. He was wrong about everything. If you're watching this and you're in a situation like I was, if someone is hitting you, controlling you, stealing from you, or making you feel like you're crazy, please know that you're not alone, and you're not powerless. Document everything. Take photos of injuries, save threatening texts, record conversations if it's legal in your state. Keep evidence somewhere safe, somewhere your abuser can't access it. Tell someone you trust, even if it's scary, even if you think they won't believe you. Most people want to help, they just don't know how unless you ask them directly. If you don't have anyone to call, the National Domestic Violence Hotline is available 24/7 at 1-800-799-7233. They have counselors who understand financial abuse, legal advocates who can help you navigate the system, and safety planning specialists who can help you leave safely when you're ready. To everyone else watching, if you see something, say something. If you witness domestic violence, don't just stand there like those 150 people at the Christmas party. Speak up. Call the police. Be the person I needed that night. Don't assume that someone else will handle it. Don't convince yourself that it's not your business or that you might be misunderstanding the situation. Trust your instincts and act on them. The difference between being a bystander and being a hero is often just making one phone call. Michael Harrison is currently serving his sentence at Federal Correctional Institution Devens here in Massachusetts. He'll be eligible for parole in 2032, but given the severity of his crimes and his lack of genuine remorse, it's unlikely he'll be released early. He still writes me letters sometimes, and I still put them through the shredder without reading them. Some doors once closed should stay closed forever. David Walsh is at FCI Raybrook in New York. Eleanor is at the Federal Women's Facility in Connecticut. Jennifer was released last year after serving her full sentence, and now works as a paralegal in Vermont under her married name. William Harrison, Michael's father, passed away 8 months ago in a memory care facility that's funded by restitution payments from his son's crimes. I wasn't allowed to attend his funeral. The restraining order prevents me from having any contact with surviving Harrison family members. But I sent flowers with a note that said, "Thank you for the stories." Because even though his son used him as a victim and a cover for criminal activity, William was genuinely kind to me during the years I cared for him. In his lucid moments, he treated me with more respect and affection than his son ever did. Harrison and Associates offices in downtown Boston were converted into condos. The building that housed 3 generations of what everyone thought was a respectable family law firm is now home to young professionals who probably have no idea about the crimes that were planned in those conference rooms. Sometimes I drive past it on my way to work and think about how many lives were destroyed by people who hid behind respectability and tradition and community standing. Thank you for listening to my story. If it helped even one person recognize that they deserve better than what they're accepting, then sharing the most traumatic experience of my life was worth it. Remember, you are not what happened to you. You are what you choose to become after it happens. And you deserve so much more than someone who makes you feel grateful for basic human decency. Take care of yourselves out there. I'll see you in the next video.